I have been putting off watching the 1963 film of Cleopatra my entire adult life. Look, 4 hours and 11 minutes is a mammoth watch time, especially for my millennial mum brain. So I could just never quite commit. But once I started looking at it like a TV series and breaking it down into bits, I could actually get it done. So this week, 6 months into researching ancient goddesses for my goddess project, I finally sat down and watched it. And I need to talk about it because what I watched was one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen on the screen. It felt like visually nourishing, and it was incredible, not just as a film, but as a feat of human making, because everything you see in the film is real. All the sets, all the people, all the costumes, thousands of extras, and there is zero CGI, obviously, but just the pure scale of the film is mind-blowing. And to be honest, in an age of like digital enhancement and AI, to actually watch something that you know was real and that everything you see was created by human hands felt so refreshing, because you just know it was all made by real people. And I think when your brain knows that everything was made by hand, it puts so much more value on what you're actually seeing and absorbing. It's so different to watching, say, like a Star Wars movie or a modern sci-fi fantasy. And when I finished the film and actually did a little bit of research behind it, the behind the scenes is so messy and the lore behind the film is super dramatic and very chaotic that I just had to share it with you guys. But there is something I need to talk about before we get into all of that juicy stuff. Cleopatra herself was one of the most powerful, intelligent, multifaceted, and politically brilliant rulers of her generation and the ancient world in general. But she is almost entirely remembered for who she slept with. And this film, as extraordinary as it is part of that problem. So today I'm going to attempt to hold both of those things at once. The most chaotic Hollywood film ever, and also the complex intellectual woman it failed to show us. So let's look quickly at who Cleopatra actually was, because the film largely skips that context in favor of the romanticization of her relationships. And apologies if you can hear my kids stomping and yelling and laughing with my mum upstairs. Cleopatra VII was a scholar, a linguist, and a political strategist of the highest order. She was the first ruler of her dynasty to actually learn Egyptian. The Ptolemaic dynasty had actually ruled Egypt for 300 years, and most of them never bothered to learn the language of the people that they governed. And not just that, she spoke 9 languages. 9. And here's something a lot of people miss. Cleopatra was technically not Egyptian. She was Greek Macedonian on her father's side. The Ptolemaic dynasty actually descended from Alexander the Great and his generals, but her mother's origins are unverified. Some historians believe that she was part of the family of priests of Memphis, which would make Cleopatra at least part Egyptian in her heritage. But we genuinely don't know what she looked like. What we do know is that she understood Egyptian. She was the first of her dynasty to actually speak the language, and she worshipped the Egyptian gods. She actually presented herself as Isis incarnate. So whatever her ancestry, she chose to be Egyptian. Her relationships with Caesar and Antony weren't her romantic life, they were her political life. She was using every tool that was available to a woman in the ancient world to keep the most powerful empire on earth from swallowing Egypt whole. And she nearly succeeded. When she died, the asp kind of snake biting her story is most likely false. Most likely it was poison. But once she died, Egypt fell to Rome within days. She really had been the last thing holding it together. And that woman deserves a better film than she got. Don't get me wrong, the film is incredible. But in terms of her complexity and depth and intellect as an actual person, she did deserve better. So let's talk about how the film did get made. In 1958, 20th Century Fox had a simple idea. They wanted to remake their 1917 silent film, Cleopatra, and they wanted to keep it financially modest, a budget of US $2 million. Quick, straightforward, and profitable, right? Wrong. When Elizabeth Taylor agreed to the role, she demanded to be paid $1 million US, and this was the first time in history an actor had ever requested that amount of money for their role. But Fox said yes, and that was their first mistake, as we'll see. Production began at Pinewood Studios in London in September 1960, and almost immediately, everything went wrong. The studio ceilings were too low for the set designs, there weren't enough sound stages, The unions were restrictive, and the English weather, cold, grey, relentless, was actually destroying the elaborate Egyptian sets and exotic plants that they'd had imported for the film. Then Elizabeth Taylor got pneumonia. And not just a mild case of pneumonia, an extremely severe case of pneumonia, which then led to an emergency tracheotomy. She was hospitalized for weeks, and obviously production ground to a halt. That's what you can actually see in the film. She's got a scar down her neck here, and I had to pause it and be like, what's going on here? It's not like a trick of the light. Did a little research, and yeah, that's her tracheotomy scar. So by the time it was clear that London really wasn't working, 16 weeks of filming had already happened, and it only produced 10 minutes of usable film. And at a cost of roughly 7 million US dollars, which is about 100 million Australian dollars today, the director, Ruben Mamoulian, resigned. The entire cast was replaced. Peter Finch and Stephen Boyd out, with Richard Burton and Rex Harrison in, and the script was scrapped entirely. And the sets, detailed, elaborate, expensive, were completely abandoned. They were actually so elaborate that the company sold the sets to another film rather than demolish them. And that film was the British comedy Carry On Cleo. So these elaborate sets were actually given to a parody show of Cleopatra. Then production relocated to Cinecittà Studios in Rome in September 1961. The new director, Joseph L. Mankiewicz, was brought in specifically to save the project. And he arrived there to find that there was still no shooting script. And he actually rewrote the script as they were filming it, while simultaneously directing and writing one of the most expensive films in history. Now, the scale of what they built in Rome was extraordinary, so much so that the sets actually caused a material shortage in Italy. The Roman Forum, constructed at the Cinecittà, was 3 times the size of the actual Roman Forum, and they built 79 sets in total. And here's the thing I can't stop thinking about as someone who also makes things. Every single person you see in the film is a real person in a real costume. And the entry parade when they go into Rome is obviously the most incredible entry parade I've ever seen on screen, and you should 100% watch it. But there are thousands of extras, and every one of them is dressed. Every one of them has a costume in the film, and that was 26,000 costumes. Like, I can't even fathom the amount of work that would have taken. No CGI, no digital crowd enhancement, 26,000 actual costumes on 26,000 actual people. Which brings me to the part of the story that I find most extraordinary. It took 4 designers to clothe this film. The original designer, Oliver Messel, he designed the London costumes. All of his costumes were abandoned when they moved production to Rome. Everything he made, gone. Then for Rome, the work was divided into 3 designers' workloads, and they would all go on to share the Academy Award for Best Costume Design. So Vittorio Nino Novarese, an Italian man born in Rome, designed all the male cast costumes. Rene Conley, a Hollywood studio designer, designed all the female cast costumes. And Irene Sharaff, who I want to talk about specifically, was hired exclusively to design and create Elizabeth Taylor's costumes, 65 of them. Irene Sharaff had 15 Oscar nominations and won 5 of them for An American in Paris, The King and I, West Side Story, Cleopatra, and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, one of the greatest costume designers Hollywood ever produced. And for her costumes for Cleopatra, she did actually go to primary sources. She based a lot of her design on the sculptures that were around during Cleopatra's actual lifetime, specifically tomb paintings and the painted sculpture of Nefertiti. The Nefertiti relief most likely inspired her main concept that Cleopatra should wear fitted strap gowns. And from tomb paintings, she learnt that most colour and pattern in ancient Egypt came from the jewellery and the accessories. The costume showcased a blend of Egyptian, Roman, and 1960s mod fashion elements. It was kind of a mix of historical authenticity and like modern sensibility. So obviously the designs weren't accurate ancient Egyptian, but they were a kind of considered blend of the time it was created in, the place it was created in, and the woman it was actually about. Now, I do need to say, obviously, Elizabeth Taylor playing Cleopatra in 1963 is whitewashing, a white American woman in a role representing a North African and Macedonian Greek heritage. That's a pattern that Hollywood has and still does now. And it does matter, even if some people don't think it matters. That kind of default to white Western leads for prestige historical roles, regardless of the actual ethnicity of the historical figure, is really a documented pattern that happens in Hollywood all the time and always has. But it also does have real consequences for who gets to tell these stories and who gets to see themselves represented. And we see it all the time, and it's happening in the Odyssey in all different ways, but, you know, especially as Matt Damon as Odysseus. So it's a pattern. Now, Irene Sharaff's historically informed costumes kind of sit alongside that uncomfortable truth. Elizabeth Taylor required 65 costumes, 30 wigs, 125 pieces of jewelry, totaling 130,000 US dollars, which is about 3 million Australian dollars today. And her costume budget alone was 194,000 US dollars, which is about Australian $4.4 million today. And the cultural impact was enormous. We know that. The Cleopatra eye, the heavy kohl liner, dramatic kind of cat eye became the defining eye makeup look of the 1960s. Revlon actually launched a Sphinx Eyes commercial directly inspired by it. Snake rings, arm cuffs, geometric haircuts, maxi dresses, all popularized by this epic film. So Irene Sharaff dressed Elizabeth Taylor as Cleopatra and changed how an entire decade looked. Now, I cannot do this video without talking about the affair. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton were both married to other people when they started filming this. The affair was immediate and completely public, and it actually made international headlines. And even the Vatican issued commentary, you know, with it being filmed right near the Vatican City in Rome, about the moral indecency. And this kind of moral outrage followed them everywhere. They married in 1964, they divorced in 1974, remarried in 1975, and divorced again in 1976. So he became her fifth and sixth husband. And when Burton died in 1984, Taylor said she never stopped loving him. And here is where I want to come back to Cleopatra herself, because the connections between Taylor's life and Cleopatra's life in terms of their romantic relationships is really stark. So this story of Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, their love story, their chaos, their inability to be with each other or be without each other, did actually completely overshadow the film at the time. The production, the costume, the extraordinary achievement of what was actually built for it. Just as Cleopatra's relationships with Caesar and Antony have overshadowed almost everything else about her. Her scholarship, her languages, her political genius, her 21-year reign. And that kind of pattern just keeps repeating. The woman's extraordinary achievements kind of disappear behind a romanticized love story. And the film itself is kind of responsible for that. It was based on Roman sources, so we're talking Plutarch, Suetonius, Appian, all male Roman writers, with every reason to frame Cleopatra as a dangerous seductress rather than a brilliant strategist. So the film largely inherited that perspective and reproduced it in a visual format. After all of it, the bankruptcy, the scandal, the London disaster, Mankiewicz' 6-hour cut that got reduced to just over 3 hours against his wishes, and Elizabeth Taylor condemned the final cut. She said they had cut out the heart, the essence, the motivations, the very core, and tacked on all those battle scenes. And yet, the film won 4 Academy Awards, and it was the highest grossing film of 1963. The New York Times called it a surpassing entertainment, one of the great epic films of our day. And that entry parade into Rome that I was talking about, Cleopatra arriving on a sphinx, thousands of people throwing rose petals, the black dress, the gold headdress, is one of the most extraordinary sequences you've ever seen on film. And Cleopatra's not arriving as this suppliant or as a prisoner. She is arriving as a goddess, as Isis incarnate. And Rome and Caesar and Mark Antony all have their jaws on the floor. And that is Irene Sharaff's work. It's the set designer's work. But Sharaff's work is translating Cleopatra's own internal intellectual strategy into design, into costume, into entertainment and exuberance. And it is magnificent. Now, did it show us the full Cleopatra? No. Does it give us the scholar, the linguist, the politician, the woman who spoke 9 languages? No. Does it show us the woman who chose to speak Egyptian in a line of rulers who had never even bothered before? Not really. but it gives us the mic drop, and that mic drop is epic. The total cost of Cleopatra 1963 was 44 million US dollars, which is approximately 780 million Australian dollars in today's money. It nearly destroyed a studio. It launched one of the most famous love affairs in Hollywood history. It changed fashion for a decade. And it gave us one of the most visually extraordinary films ever made. And at the center of it, dressed in 65 costumes based on actual Egyptian artifacts, wearing the Cleopatra eye that Irene Sharaff designed from primary historical sources, was a woman playing one of the most powerful historical rulers in the ancient world, who in my opinion deserved a better film. And perhaps the 6-hour cut is that. Maybe I need to find that. But she did get an incredible film. If this resonated with you, the Goddess Project is the series where I go super deep into all of this type of content. The history of draped cloth, ancient goddesses of weaving and sewing, and why what women wear has always been a political act. I'll add all my links below. Thanks so much for watching. If you love Cleopatra, there's this beautiful necklace here by Common Era. It's the back. So I'll leave my discount code in the description box as well.